The town is quiet. Dust moves across the empty main street. A wooden sign creaks slowly in the wind. In places like this, stories grow like weeds. Some are big and loud. Some are almost forgotten. Dan Tucker's story is one of the quiet ones. He is not the famous face on old movie posters. He is not the name in every school book. But in the days of the Wild West, his name carries a special weight. They call him Dangerous Dan Tucker. No one knows the full truth, but they all agree on one thing. When Dan Tucker pulls a gun, it is usually the last sound a man hears. Dan Tucker is born around the year 1849, most likely in Canada. There are no clear baby pictures. There are no school records that tell people what kind of boy he is. History does not keep those details. He appears in the story like a shadow stepping out of smoke. As a young man, he goes south. The world is changing. The American frontier is open, wild, and dangerous. Men with strong hands and cold nerves can find work there. Dan travels down through rough land and rough towns. He sees hard people and hard lives. He learns how quickly a simple argument can turn into a deadly fight. Some people later say he is already dangerous before he reaches New Mexico. They whisper about a killing in Colorado. They talk about a fight that may or may not have happened. No one can prove it. But those rumors follow him like a long shadow. By the early 1870s, Dan Tucker reaches New Mexico territory. This land is wide, dry, and often lawless. Cattle rustlers move across the open range. Bandits wait near lonely roads. Mining towns explode overnight, filling with men, money, and guns. Most people want peace, but peace is hard to keep. The law is still young, still weak. In many places, the law is only as strong as the man who wears the badge. This is where Dan Tucker steps into the record. In 1875, the sheriff of Grant County, New Mexico, is a man named Harvey Whitehill. Is facing trouble on every side. Cattle are being stolen. Drifters with quick tempers fill the saloons. Sometimes the judge is miles away. Sometimes there is no judge at all. Sheriff Whitehill needs help, not just any help. He needs someone who will not run. He needs someone who will ride alone into a camp of armed men and still do the job. So he hires Dan Tucker. Dan is not a large man. He is not loud. He does not brag in a saloon. He does not tell big stories. But the people who see him notice his eyes. They are calm. They are steady. They look like the eyes of a man who has already seen too much. Whitehill gives him a badge. Dan Tucker becomes deputy sheriff. That is a simple piece of metal. It does not stop bullets. It does not scare bad men by itself. But when Dan pins that badge to his shirt, something in the story changes. From that day, Dan's life is tied to the law. He rides across long, empty land to serve papers and warrants. He knocks on doors where no one wants to see him. He walks into camps where the firelight shines on gun barrels. Each ride is the same on paper. Go here. Arrest this man. Bring him back. But every ride holds a question in the air. Will this end with handcuffs or with gun smoke? Dan is fast with a gun. People learn that quickly. When a wanted man refuses to come in, when hands go for holsters instead of the sky, Dan reacts. He does not shout long warnings. He does not waste time. There is a flash. There is a shot. There is a body on the ground. In town, people share the news. Some feel safer. Some feel uneasy. But slowly, a name begins to grow for him. Not just Dan Tucker. Now people say it with an extra word. They call him Dangerous Dan. The nickname is not a joke. It is not a friendly tease. It is a warning. Outlaws hear it and think twice. Ranchers hear it and sleep a little easier. Townspeople hear it and feel a strange mix of comfort and fear. They are glad he is on their side. They hope he never has a reason to come for them. Dan Tucker is more than a gunfighter. Over time, he takes other law jobs too. He works as a town lawman in rough places where miners fight over cards and gold dust. He works as a livestock inspector, tracking cattle thieves across the open range, reading tracks in the dirt like words on a page. Every day, he moves on the thin line between life and death, order and chaos. He is the man who walks into the saloon when everyone else stays outside. He is the man who rides toward the trouble when others ride away. At night, he returns to whatever simple room or bunk he has. He takes off the badge. He lays his gun belt nearby. No one knows exactly what he thinks in those quiet hours. No letters remain to tell his private thoughts. But the work he does leaves marks. Each arrest, each chase, each gunfight adds another invisible weight to his shoulders. The world sees only the title, Dangerous Dan. But behind that name stands a man who must live with the sound of every shot he fires. Still, the territory needs him. The sheriff needs him. The ranchers need him. The honest people trying to build a life in this wild land need someone who is not afraid to stand in the path of danger. So, Dan Tucker keeps riding. He keeps pinning on the badge. He keeps walking into rooms where a single wrong move can mean a sudden grave. His legend begins quietly. No brass band. No grand ceremony. Just a small man with a steady gaze, a pinned badge, and a reputation that is only starting to grow. This is the beginning of the story of Dangerous Dan Tucker, the quiet lawman whose name will soon travel far across the dust and danger of the Wild West, that the sun is low over the New Mexico hills. The sky is red and gold. Don Tucker rides alone. His horse moves at a slow, steady pace. A small cloud of dust follows behind them. In the distance, a thin line of smoke rises from a campfire. Don knows that smoke. He knows what it means. Men, guns, possibly trouble. Pinned to his shirt is the same small badge. It shines faintly in the last light of day. He touches it once, very lightly, as if to remind himself why he is here. He is deputy sheriff. This is his job. News has reached Grant County that a pair of cattle thieves are hiding in the hills. They are wanted men. They have already shot at one ranch hand. They have sworn they will not be taken alive. Many people in the area are scared. Cattle mean money. Cattle mean food. If thieves steal livestock, families can lose everything. So someone must stop them. Don Tucker rides out to do just that. He does not take a large posse with him. He does not march in with a crowd. He prefers to move quiet. He prefers to see and hear before he is seen and heard. As he gets closer to the camp, he slows his horse. He ties the reins to a shrub and continues on foot. His steps are soft on the dry ground. He hears voices, rough laughter, the clink of a bottle. A man coughing. Don takes cover behind a rock and looks. Two men sit by the fire. Their rifles lie within easy reach. A small herd of stolen cattle grazes nearby in the fading light. Don studies them. He is not in a hurry. He knows any wrong move can end his life in a heartbeat. In a calm, steady voice, he calls out, "Boys, this is Deputy Tucker from Grant County." He says, "You're wanted. Step away from the fire with your hands up." For a moment, there is silence. Then chairs scrape the ground. One man curses. Dan hears the sound. He expects the sharp, fast scrape of wood and metal. Someone reaches for a gun. He does not wait for a second sound on one smooth motion. He steps out, aims and fires. The echo of the shot hits the hills. One man falls. The other freezes, hands shaking in the air. Dodd moves closer, gun still pointed, eyes cold and clear. "Don't," he says quietly. The second man looks at his fallen partner, then at Dan. He sees that this small, pale-eyed lawman does not tremble. He understands that if he makes one wrong move, he will join the body on the ground. Slowly, he drops his gun and lets himself be taken. Scenes like this become common in Dan Tucker's life. New Mexico is full of men who think they can live by the gun and never face a price. Dan is the one sent to show them they are wrong. Sometimes he comes back with prisoners. Sometimes he comes back alone. Word spreads. People talk in low voices in the saloons and general stores. They say things like, "Did you hear? Tucker brought in that rustler from down by the river. Other one didn't make it. Man's as quick as a snake." They start calling him Dangerous Dan more and more. The name sticks. It passes from ranch to ranch, town to town. Travelers carry it along dusty roads. Soon, outlaws hear it too. On another town, another night, the story repeats itself. A drunk cowboy waves his gun in a noisy saloon. He has been fighting at the poker table. Cards are scattered. The table is tipped. Men press against the walls, trying to stay out of the line of fire. The cowboy shouts that no one can tell him what to do. No sheriff, no deputy, no judge. The room grows very still. Then the swinging doors creak. Don Tucker steps inside. He does not shout. He does not try to look bigger than he is. He just walks forward slowly, eyes fixed on the man with the gun. "Put it down," Don says. The cowboy laughs, wild and loud. He points the gun toward Dan. His hands shake slightly from drink and anger. "Who's going to make me?" he yells. The room holds its breath. Dan looks at him, calm as ever. His voice stays low. "The ground," he says quietly, "or I will." For 1 second the cowboy hesitates. He is young. He thinks he is fast. He thinks he can test this quiet stranger with the pale eyes. He makes his choice. His hand twitches. The barrel of his gun begins to rise. Dan moves faster. One shot. The cowboy's gun drops from his hand. He falls backward over the broken table. The room fills with shocked silence. No one cheers. No one claps. They just look at Dan Tucker, the man whose face stays blank even after taking a life. These are the kinds of moments that build Dan's legend. To some, he is a hero, a man who keeps killers and bullies in check. To others, he is a frightening reminder of how quickly things can end when the law is carried on a belt instead of written on a page. Don himself does not argue with either view. He does not give speeches. He does not ask to be liked. He just keeps doing the job. He rides to ranches when cattle go missing. He tracks footprints in the dust and follows broken branches. He studies small signs that most men never notice. He learns the land, the dry riverbeds, the hidden trails, the rocks that offer good cover in a fight. Over the years, he becomes not just a lawman, but a part of the landscape itself, hard, quiet, and always watching. At night, in some plain room lit by a single lamp, he sits alone. He takes off his gun belt. He wipes the dust from the metal. He checks each bullet carefully. Like a man checking tools before another day's work, he might think of the men he has brought in. He might think of the ones who never made it back. No one knows for sure. There are no written words to tell us, but his actions speak. Each long ride, each long silence, each time he pins the badge back onto his shirt in the morning, the nickname Dangerous Dan grows larger. louder, like a storm cloud over the territory, and in the middle of that storm rides a small, steady man who knows that danger is not just a word people say about him, it is the air he breathes every single day. This is the world that shapes Dan Tucker, the world that will soon force him to face not only outlaws and gunmen, but the heavy cost of living by the gun in the name of the law. Morning comes early in New Mexico. The sky turns from black to gray, then slowly to pale blue. Cool air slips through the open window of a small room. Dan Tucker is already awake. He sits on the edge of a rough wooden bed. His boots are on the floor, dusty from yesterday's ride. His shirt hangs on a chair. On the small table beside the bed lie his badge and his gun belt. For a moment he just looks at them. The badge is simple. The metal is scratched from years of use. The gun belt is dark and worn, shaped by his hand and his hip. These two things define his life. They are the tools that give him purpose, and the tools that put him in the path of death again and again. He picks them up, one at a time. He checks the gun, the bullets, the leather. Then, without any show, he pins on the badge. Dan Tucker is ready to step back into the world that calls him Dangerous Dan. The name has grown. At first it was just a whisper in town, a careful tone in a bar, a quiet warning, careful. Dangerous Dan's in town. Now it moves farther. Ranchers talk about him when they brand cattle. Travelers share his story at campfires along the trail. Even outlaws know his name. They pass it around in low voices as they sit in hidden camps, cleaning stolen guns. Some laugh when they hear it. They say no man is that fast. No man is that hard to kill. But others don't laugh. They know better. They have seen what happens when a man underestimates the small deputy with the calm eyes. In time, Dan's work changes shape. He is not always just a deputy chasing wanted posters. The territory needs more from him. Cattle theft is rising. For ranchers, cattle are not just animals. They are money, land, future, and survival. If someone steals a herd, a family can lose years of hard work overnight. So the authorities give Dan another job. He becomes a livestock inspector. It does not sound grand. It is not the kind of title that makes songs. But in New Mexico, it is one of the most important jobs a man can have. It means he has the power to check brands, stop herds, ask questions, and arrest men who cannot prove where their cattle came from. It also means he spends even more time alone, riding across empty land, always watching for men who think they can outsmart the law. Dry Valley stretches out under the hot sun. Dan rides slowly along a narrow trail. Ahead, a small herd of cattle moves across the plain, dust rising around their legs. 3 riders are driving the herd. They wear wide hats, dusty shirts, and walk their horses in an easy, lazy line. To anyone else, it might look like a simple cattle drive, but Dan looks closer. He sees the brands on the animals. He recognizes a mark from a ranch many miles away in a different direction. Something is wrong. He presses his heels into his horse's sides. The animal speeds up. When he gets close enough, he lifts his voice. "That herd's not yours," Dan calls out. "To stop where you are." The 3 riders look back. Their eyes go to the badge on his shirt. 2 of them share a quick glance. One smiles, but it is not a friendly smile. "Just moving cattle, mister," the smiling one says. "No harm in that." Dan rides closer. He looks at each man's face. He sees tight jaws, tense shoulders, hands that stay too near their holsters. He knows this look. He has seen it many times. "Show me your bill of sale," he says, "or turn those animals back." There is a beat of silence. The air feels thick. Heat presses down from the wide, open sky. Then it happens. The smiling man's hand flashes down toward his gun. The second rider moves at the same time. To them it feels fast. To Dan, it feels slow. His own gun is already in his hand. He fires once, then again. The first man falls sideways off his horse. The second grabs his shoulder, drops his gun, and cries out in pain. The third man freezes, hands lifted high, breath shaking. He has heard the stories. He has heard the name, and now, seeing his partners on the ground, he understands that the stories were not just talk. He looks into Dan Tucker's steady eyes and chooses life. "I'll turn him back," he says quickly. "I'll go wherever you say. Don't shoot, please." Dan nods once. The danger has passed, but his face does not change much. He holsters his gun, ties the wounded man's arm, and leads all 3 back toward town. This is Dan's life over and over. Quiet rides, sudden fights, decisions made in a blink that cannot be undone. He kills men who choose to fight the law. He arrests men who decide to give in. Each time the story grows a little more in town, people talk about what he has done. Some tell the tale with pride, glad that their land and cattle are protected. Others tell it with a slight shiver, wondering how a man can stay so calm when death is so close. Either way, Dan Tucker's name grows sharper, harder, more famous. Dangerous Dan. It sounds almost like the name of a character in a dime novel. But he is not a printed hero. He is a real man, made of flesh, bone, and quiet resolve. Sometimes, on rare days, he stops at a small cafe or kitchen behind a saloon. He sits at a rough table, eats a simple meal, and listens. People do not always know who he is at first. He does not dress fancy. He does not make a show of his badge. He listens to the gossip, the stories about himself. He shot 3 men at once. Someone says, "No, it was 5. Another answers, "He can shoot a coin out of the air. I heard he can track a man across dry rock." Dan knows most of these details are untrue. People like to make tales bigger. They like to stretch them until they almost break. He does not correct them. He does not stand and shout, "That's not how it was." He simply eats, pays for his food, and leaves if someone recognizes him and whispers, "There goes Dangerous Dan." He keeps walking. The myth belongs to other people. The work belongs to him. The years roll by like wagon wheels. Dan's reputation now reaches beyond Grant County. Towns that have never met him still know his name. Outlaws planning a robbery ask each other, "Is Tucker anywhere near here?" If the answer is yes, many of them change their plans because in the wide wild space of New Mexico there are many guns, but very few like the one carried by Dangerous Dan Tucker. And while the world tells stories about him, only Dan knows the real weight that each story hides, a weight that is slowly settling on his shoulders with every new day he pins on the badge. The days in New Mexico are bright and harsh. The nights are long and quiet in both. One man keeps riding. Don Tucker, deputy sheriff, livestock inspector, the man they now simply call Dangerous Dan. His name moves across the land like wind. It blows through ranches, mining camps, and lonely stage stops. Everyone seems to know a story about him. Some stories are true, some are stretched, but all of them end the same way, with Dan standing and the other man falling at first. People in the towns feel only relief. With Dan around, cattle thieves are careful. Drunk cowboys think twice before pulling a gun. Outlaws sometimes leave an area altogether, looking for easier ground. Mothers tell their children, "The law is strong here. Dangerous Dan is around." Ranchers say if Tucker is on the case, those rustlers won't bother us again. But as the years roll by, another feeling begins to grow under the surface. Fear, not just fear of outlaws, fear of Dan himself. One hot afternoon, in a dusty town, Dan walks down the main street. He is not chasing anyone. He is not hunting a thief. He is simply going to speak to the local judge. Still, the street reacts to him. A group of men playing cards outside the saloon go quiet. A woman sweeping a porch pauses and pulls her child closer. 2 cowboys at the water trough fall silent and turn their eyes away. Dan notices. He notices everything, but his face stays calm. He keeps walking, boots tapping quietly on the dry boards. To them, he is not just a man. He is a reminder of bullets, blood, and sudden endings. They trust him to protect them. They also know that, if they cross the line, he will not hesitate to treat them the same way he treats any outlaw that evening. Inside the small jail, a young deputy asks him a question. The young man is new to the badge. His hands are still soft. His eyes still carry a hopeful shine. "Dan," he says, "do you ever get tired of it?" Don looks up from the desk where he is checking reports. "Tired of what?" he asks. "The shooting," the young deputy replies. "The killing. Folks say you've put more men in the ground than any lawman in the territory. How do you live with that?" The room is quiet. The lantern on the wall flickers. Outside, crickets sing in the dark. Don takes a slow breath. "I don't count," he says at last. "I don't keep score. I do the job. That's all." "Yeah, but..." The young man tries again. "Do you ever think maybe it's too much?" Dan looks at him for a long moment. In that look is the weight of years, dusty trails, hot gun barrels, cold bodies on dry ground. "When a man raises a gun at me," Dan says softly, "he's made his choice. I just make mine faster." The deputy falls silent, unsure what to say. Don goes back to his papers. But when the young man leaves the room, Dan's eyes stay on the empty doorway for a long while. He is not made of stone. He hears the question. He just does not have a simple answer. There are days when the line between justice and brutality becomes very thin. One such day begins with a simple message. The group of suspected horse thieves is hiding out near a dry creek bed. They have been causing trouble for weeks, stealing animals, threatening ranch hands, and shooting at anyone who tries to stop them. Dan rides out with 2 local men who know the land. They move slowly, keeping low, using rocks and scrub for cover. When they reach the creek bed, they see the camp. 3 men, a small fire, horses tied nearby. Don raises his hand, signaling for quiet. He calls out, clear and strong, "Men in the camp, this is the law. Step out with your hands up." For a moment, nothing moves. Then one man stands. His hands are empty. Another follows, hesitating. The 3rd man does not stand. Instead, there is a flash of metal. A shot cracks through the air. One of the locals cries out and drops to a knee, clutching his arm. Don reacts without thinking. He fires back. The man with the gun falls. The other 2 dive for cover, then freeze as Dan shouts at them again, voice like steel. "Don't move. You're done." They surrender later. Back in town, people hear only parts of the story. Some say the thieves never fired at all. Some say Dan shot first. Some say he didn't give them a chance. Don knows the truth. The men who were there know the truth. But truth on the frontier often loses to rumor, and with every new rumor, the picture of Dangerous Dan becomes a little darker. a little more frightening. Children in one town start a game. They point pretend guns at each other and shout, "I'm Dangerous Dan, hands up." Their mothers pull them away, scolding them, "Don't play about such things." But the name stays in their minds. Even the young grow up knowing that somewhere out there is a man with a badge and a gun who never seems to miss. Dan feels the distance growing between himself and the people he protects down in saloons. Men nod to him but rarely invite him to join their games. In stores, shopkeepers are polite but nervous. At dances or small gatherings, women give him a careful smile, then turn back to safer company. He is welcome, but always a little apart. The law he carries makes him useful. The danger he carries makes him lonely. One night, he sits alone outside a small town, back against a fence post, hat tipped back, eyes on the stars. The sky is wide and full of cold light. A coyote howls in the distance. Dan thinks about how things might have been if he had not taken the badge. Maybe he could have been a rancher, counting cattle instead of bodies. Maybe he could have been a simple cowboy, worrying only about weather and wages. But the world did not turn that way for him. He chose this path. Or maybe it chose him. Now, every step he takes is along the edge of something sharp. He cannot go back to being just Dan. The land knows him now as Dangerous Dan Tucker. Still, the territory needs him. The sheriff needs him. The ranchers and merchants need him. When word comes of trouble, they do not hesitate. "Send for Tucker," they say. "Send for Dangerous Dan." And he goes. Every time, even as the whispers grow darker, even as his own doubts grow louder in the quiet of the night. He keeps riding. He keeps drawing his gun when he must. He keeps living on that thin, hard line where law and violence meet. This is the life of Dan Tucker, now admired from a distance, feared up close, and slowly being pulled deeper into a legend that the real man can barely recognize as himself. The legend of Dangerous. Don Tucker keeps growing, but so does something else. Not the weight of his gun, not the weight of his saddle or his boots. The weight inside. Another dry season settles over New Mexico. The ground cracks. Wind carries dust like smoke. Cattle walk with their heads low, searching for anything green. Hard times make men desperate. With hunger and worry comes trouble. More theft, more fights, more men willing to pull a gun rather than lose what little they have. And when trouble rises, one name keeps coming up. Send for Tucker. Dangerous Dan will handle it. Dan does not argue. When the sheriff calls, he goes. One evening, just before sunset, Dan stands in the sheriff's small office. A rancher sits across from the desk, hat in his hands, eyes red with anger. "They took 6 head, the rancher says. 6, branded and paid for. I've seen the tracks myself. They're heading west, toward the rocks by Dry Wash. I can't afford to lose 'em, Dan." The sheriff looks at Dan. His eyes say what his mouth doesn't. "We need you again." Dan nods once. "I'll ride out," he says. "Tonight." The rancher looks relieved. The sheriff looks tired. Dan looks calm. Only Dan knows how much effort that calmness takes now. The ride to Dry Wash is long and quiet. The sky above turns deep purple, then black. Stars appear, sharp and cold. Dan's horse knows the way. They have traveled so many trails together that the animal almost moves on its own. Dan's mind is not empty. It is full of faces. Men who tried to run, men who tried to shoot, men who surrendered with shaking hands. Some of those men are buried now. Some serve time in far-off prisons. Their names blur together, but their last moments do not. He remembers their eyes. He remembers the look people get when they suddenly understand that death is closer than breath. He reaches the rocky area near Dry Wash. He dismounts and leads his horse to a patch of scrub for cover. In the dark, he moves like a shadow. His boots press dust instead of crunching gravel. His hand rests lightly on the grip of his revolver. Ahead, he sees it, a small camp, a faint fire, the shape of cattle resting nearby. He listens. Voices drift through the night air. Young voices. Don steps closer. Using a boulder as cover, he sees them now, 3 figures near the fire. One man looks older, maybe in his 30s. The other 2 are boys, 17, maybe 18. Still more boy than man in the way they move. They laugh quietly. One of them tosses a small rock into the fire and watches the sparks. Don feels something twist inside. He has faced killers with cold eyes and steady hands. Men who knew exactly what they were doing. These boys look like they are still learning what kind of men they want to be. But they are sitting beside stolen cattle, and that makes them his job. Dan steps out from the dark. His voice rings out steady and clear. "Don't move. This is the law." The boys jump. The older man curses. Dan stands where they can see his badge, his stance, his gun. "Hands up," he says, slow and high. The older man's eyes narrow. He has the look of someone who has seen trouble before. But it's not him that worries Dan. It's the boy closest to the rifle lying on the ground. Don watches his eyes. Fear, panic, pride, all fighting inside at once. "Don't do it," Don says quietly. Eyes on the boy. "You don't want your last mistake to be your fastest one." For one long second time stretches. The boy looks at the rifle. His hand twitches. He wants to prove something. To his friends, to himself, maybe he has heard stories. Maybe he thinks he can be the one who finally beats Dangerous Dan. His fingers brush the wood of the rifle stock. Dan has seen this moment before. Too many times. He knows what comes next if he waits. He knows that if that rifle rises even a few inches, someone will die. With his own hand moves, the shot cracks across the rocks. The boy falls back, eyes wide, hand still inches from the gun. The older man shouts and dives for cover. The other boy screams and freezes. Dan's voice cuts through the chaos like a blade. Stay still. They do. When the dust settles, the boy lies still, too still. Don steps forward and kneels beside him. He checks for a breath he knows he will not find. None comes. The boy's face is young, freckles across his nose, a faint mustache that never had time to grow. Don stares at him for a long moment. He has shot grown outlaws before, men who chose their path, year after year. But this one hurts in a different way. The other boy sobs quietly. The older man stares at Dan with a mix of hate and fear. When he didn't have to kill him, the older man whispers, he was just a kid. Dan's jaw tightened. He reached for a gun, Dan says, voice flat. He made a choice. The older man spits in the dirt. Maybe he did. Maybe you did too. The words stick in the air. Dan says nothing. He ties their hands and leads them toward town. The stolen cattle follow behind, but all the way back, he feels the ghost of that 1 second. The second where maybe, just maybe, things could have gone another way in town. The story spreads fast. Some say the boy fired first. Some say he never had the chance. Some blame the thieves. Some blame Dan. A mother in the next county cries over the news that her son is dead. A rancher thanks God his cattle are returned. And in the middle stands Dan Tucker. Neither saint nor devil, just the man holding the smoking gun when the law and a bad decision collided. That night, Dan sits on the edge of his bed again. The badge lies on the table, beside the lamp. The gun belt hangs from the chair. He stares at his hands. They are steady. They always are. But inside, something is not steady at all. He thinks of the young face in the FIRELIGHT. He thinks of the choice. His. And the boys. He tells himself what he always tells himself. It was your life or his. You warned him he moved first. All true. All cold. But the words do not change what he feels. The legend of Dangerous Dan Tucker, who becomes stronger with each story like this. People say he never misses. He's faster than ever. He's the deadliest lawman in New Mexico. They admire the legend. They cheer the results. But the man behind the legend feels the cost of every bullet more and more, and deep inside him, a quiet question begins to grow. How long can a man live like this, before something inside him breaks? The name Dangerous Dan Tucker fills the air now. It rides ahead of him, like dust ahead of a storm. But behind that name, the man is changing. Not on the outside. He still looks the same steady eyes, same plain clothes, same slow, careful walk. Inside, though, the questions are growing louder. One afternoon, the courthouse in a small town is crowded. People fill the benches. The air is hot and still. At the front sits a tired judge, files stacked high beside him. Two men stand near the rail. Their hands are tied. Their faces are hard. They are accused of robbing a stagecoach. The driver was left beaten in the road. Passengers were held at gunpoint, their money and bags taken. Dan Tucker brought these men in. He tracked them for 2 days under a burning sun, following hoofprints and broken brush. He walked into their camp at dawn, gun in hand, voice steady as he told them to surrender. They reached for their guns. They did not get the chance to use them now. They stand in front of the judge, alive only because Dan shot to wound, not to kill. Witnesses speak. The injured driver tells his story. A passenger, shaken, describes the fear. Then the judge calls for Dan. Deputy Tucker, he says, come forward. Don steps up. The room grows quiet, even in a place full of people. His presence draws eyes. Tell the court, the judge says, what happened when you found these men? Dan speaks in simple words. He tells of the tracks, the camp, the stolen bags, the guns going for their hands. He says only what he saw, no more, no less. When he finishes, the judge studies him for a long moment. You had the right to kill them. The judge says, by law, you could have shot them dead, where they stood. A murmur passes through the room. The judge leans forward. But you did not. Dan doesn't look away. His voice is flat. They dropped when I hit M, he says. That was enough. Outside, after the hearing, a man stops him in the street. He is a shopkeeper, face sharp, eyes angry. You should have finished M. The man says, men like that, they just end up back out here. You know it, I know it. Why not save us the trouble? A few others nod. They agree. They want simple answers. Quick justice. They want a world where a man like Dan took the dirty work so they never have to think about it. Don looks at the man. There is no anger on his face, only tiredness. My job is to bring them in, he says quietly. What happens after? That's for the court. He walks away. The shopkeeper mutters loud enough for others too. Here thought he was supposed to be dangerous, he says. Maybe he's gone soft. The words sting more than Dan let show later. In a dim corner of a saloon, two cowboys talk over drinks. One says, "Tucker's still the deadliest man around." The other shakes his head. "Maybe once," he answers. Now he's thinking, too much a man who thinks that much in a gunfight ends up. Dead Dan hears this. As he passes by, he doesn't stop, but the words stay with him. On one side, people say he is too quick with a gun. On the other, they say he is not quick enough. He walks between these two judgments like walking on a thin wire. Too harsh, and he is a killer with a badge. Too soft, and he is a fool who gets people hurt. One night, trouble proves just how thin that line is. A man named Harlan, known for drinking and fighting, storms into a busy saloon. He shouts that he has been cheated at cards. He flips over a table. He throws a chair at first. It is just noise and broken glass. Then he pulls a gun. People dive for cover. Glasses shatter. Someone screams, "Get Tucker." A voice yells from outside. Don is already on his way. He pushes through the swinging doors. The room is chaos. Harlan stands in the middle, gun-waving eyes. While Don does not rush, he steps forward slowly. "Boots steady on the floor, Harlan," he says calmly. "Put the gun down." The drunk man swings around. He squints at Dan. "You again," he slurs. "Always. You think you're better than the rest of us." "It's over," Dan says. "Walk out. And you live. Keep that gun up." And you don't for a moment. Something clear shines through Harlan's eyes. He seems to understand. His arm dips. The room relaxes just a little. Then, from the back, someone shouts, "Tucker'll shoot you anyway." The words hit Harlan like a spark on dry grass. His anger flares up again. His hand jerks. The gun rises to an outsider. It all happens at once. Harlan's gun lifts. Dan's hand moves. Two shots ring out. Harlan falls. His gun skids across the floor. The room is silent. Smoke hangs in the air. Dan stands where he was, gun still in his hand, face unreadable. A woman rushes forward, kneels beside Harlan, and cries out, "He was drunk." She yells at Dan. He didn't know what he was doing. Dan's voice is low. He knew enough to point a loaded gun at people, he says, but as he holsters his weapon and turns to leave, the woman's words follow him like a shadow. Drunk. Did and single quotes to know what he was doing. Was that true? Did it matter? The law said a raised gun was a threat. His training, his habits, said to shoot before someone else did. He had done what he was supposed to do, so why did it feel so heavy? Over the next weeks, the story of Harlan's death travels. Some say Dan saved a dozen lives. Others say he killed a fool who just needed sleep in a cell in one town. A man mutters as Dan passes, "He's just a killer with permission." In another, a rancher claps Dan on the shoulder and says, "Glad you were there. You did what had to be done." Both views land on Dan like stones in the same pile. At night, now, sleep does not come easy. He lies awake, listening to the wind against the walls. Two horses shifting in the stable outside. The faces line up in his mind. Outlaws, thieves, drunk cowboys, scared boys with hands too close to guns. He asks himself the question so one else hears. Where is the line? When am I a lawman? And when am I just another man with a gun? No one answers. The badge on his table does not speak yet. When morning comes, he still pins it on. The territory is still dangerous. People still need someone who will ride into the worst of it, not turn back, so he does. He rides out again and again, carrying his calm voice, his steady aim, and the growing conflict inside him to the world. He is still Dangerous Dan Tucker, the man who never hesitates. Only he knows how much effort it takes now to be that man, and how thin the line has become between justice and something darker thought he prays has not yet crossed. Years pass over New Mexico like dust over old tracks. Towns grow. Railroads push through. New people arrive with new hopes, new clothes, and new ideas of what law should look like. But out on the edges, in the rough places, one thing has not changed. Dan Tucker still rides. His hair is a little grayer now. Lines mark the corners of his eyes. His back sometimes aches after a long day in the saddle, but his eyes remain the same, watchful, cool. The name Dangerous Dan Tucker still moves ahead of him in some places. It is spoken with respect on others, with fear here and there. You even hear something else in the way people say it. Pity inside a new, larger sheriff's office. A young deputy looks at a map on the wall. He is hungry to prove himself. Beside him, the sheriff, a man who has worked with Dan for years, marks trouble spots with his thin finger. There's been some rustling up near the canyon. The sheriff says, "We'll need to send someone." The young deputy nods. "I can handle it," he says quickly. "I've been out there before." The sheriff studies him. He knows the boy is brave. He also knows the land out there is rough-handed. The men who hide in it can be worse. "We'll send Tucker with you," the sheriff says. The deputy's smile fades, just a little. He doesn't argue, but when he thinks the sheriff isn't looking, he rolls his eyes. The sheriff notices. "You've got something to say?" he asks. The deputy shrugs. "I just thought maybe it's time we let the older man rest," he says. "Folks talk like he's some kind of ghost out there. Maybe the territory needs new blood." The sheriff leans back, folding his arms. You think that badge on your chest is enough? He asks. You think a year or two out here makes you ready for everything this land can throw at you? The young deputy doesn't answer. The sheriff's voice softens. When you've stood where Tucker has stood, he says quietly, when you've watched men's eyes right before they die, when you've had to live with what that feels like, then you can talk about who should retire. He pauses, then adds, you may not like everything he's done. You may not like everything that's been said about him. But when it comes to staying alive in bad places, there's no better teacher than Dan Tucker. A short time later, the young deputy rides next to Dan on a narrow trail. The sky above them is wide and hard blue. Their horses move in an easy rhythm for a few minutes. Neither man speaks. Finally, the deputy clears his throat. Dan, he says. Yeah, Don answers, eyes still scanning the horizon. Is it true? You've been doing this since before I was born. Dan's lips twitch in something almost like a smile. Feels longer, he says. The deputy laughs a little. Then the smile fades. Do you ever think about stopping, he asks, about settling somewhere quiet, getting a little land, maybe a family? Dan's face turns thoughtful. I've thought about a lot of things, he says. Doesn't mean they're meant for me. The deputy looks at him, curious why not. Dan takes a slow breath. Men remember, he says. Outlaws have brothers, cousins, friends. A man like me doesn't retire. He just sleeps a little lighter. They ride in silence again. The deputy hadn't thought about it like that. To him, the badge is new. To Dan, the badge is a door that never closes, that the years go on, the territory becomes more settled, more judges, more courts, more written laws and formal trials. Some of the newer officials don't like Dan's kind of story. They look at him with cool eyes and talk quietly in offices with shuttered windows. His methods are old, one says. Too rough, says another. That for the image of this new, orderly land. They forget that the orderly land they enjoy was partly built on the backs and bullets of men like Dan Tucker. One day, Don is called to testify in another case. This time, a defense lawyer in a fine suit who has never spent a night in a saddle decides to make a show. He looks at Dan like a hawk eyeing a field mouse. Deputy Tucker, the lawyer says loudly, isn't it true that people call you Dangerous Dan? Yes, Dan answers simply. And isn't it also true, the lawyer presses, that you have killed many men in this territory? Dan holds his gaze. I've been in fights, he says. I've shot men who tried to kill me or others. All of it was in the line of duty. The lawyer turns to the jury, raising his brows. In the line of duty, he says. The lawyer repeats. Tell me, deputy, do you ever worry that perhaps, just perhaps, you enjoy that reputation? The room murmurs. The question hangs in the air like smoke. Dan does not rush his answer. He thinks carefully. I don't enjoy killing, he says quietly, but I enjoy watching good people live. Sometimes, those two things come from the same bullet. The lawyer opens his mouth to push more, but the judge cuts in. That's enough, the judge says shortly. Deputy Tucker has answered your question. Don steps down from the stand. He can feel the eyes on his back, some judging, some wondering, some grateful. The mix is always the same. Soon after that trial, Dan begins to take fewer calls. Some are given to younger men. Some are handled by larger posses and more formal patrols. No one tells Dan to stop. No one takes his badge away, but slowly. The work shifts around him like a river changing course, leaving an old channel dry. He still rides. He still answers when the sheriff truly needs him, but the long, hard chases happen less often. In a small boarding house one evening, the landlady brings Dan a plate of stew. You've been here a long time, she says kindly. Longer than most. Do you ever think about staying put here? We could always use a steady man around. Dan smiles a little. A real smile this time, soft and tired. Maybe, he says. Just not sure the trouble knows how to stop knocking. She pats his arm. Sometimes trouble forgets, she says. Sometimes time does that. Dan wonders if that could ever be true for him. Every so often, he hears his own name from a table across the room or a group outside a store. You remember Dangerous Dan? Someone asks. Didn't he shoot that gang up by the canyon? Another shakes his head. No, that was somebody else. Tucker got the rustlers near the river. A third, younger man frowns. Who's Dangerous Dan? He asks. There is a pause. The older men look at each other, then one shrugs. Old Lawman, he says. From back when this place was wilder. Mean shot. Kept a lot of folks alive. Not many around now who remember the details. Dan stands nearby, hat brim low. Listening, he says nothing. He realizes something quietly. The legend is still there, but the edges are already wearing smooth. The stories are shorter, less sharp. Time is doing its work. It is starting to forget him. He walks out into the evening air. The sky is deep and dark. Stars beginning to appear. He looks up and feels something strange. Not fear, not regret exactly, but an odd emptiness. For so many years, his life was all action. Ride, track, confront, shoot if needed. Now there is more silence, more space. In that space, He wonders who he is without the constant sound of danger at his back. Is he still Dangerous Dan Tucker, or just Dan, a man with a long, heavy history that fewer and fewer people truly understand? He does not know the answer yet, but he knows this. The world he helps shape is moving on, and slowly, step by step, the man who once stood at the center of every story is beginning to slip into the shadows at the edge of the frame. Time does not stop for anyone, not even for a man like Dangerous Dan Tucker. The land he rides begins to change. More fences, more towns, more families. Where there were once wide-open stretches of wild country, now there are fields, small farms, and neat rows of houses with lamps in the windows. The Wild West is slowly becoming something else. One cool morning, Don stands on a small hill, looking down at a town he has known for years. He remembers when it was just a few one rough saloon, and a dusty street. Now there is a schoolhouse, a church with a white steeple, a proper brick courthouse. Children run and shout in the street. Women hang washing on lines between houses. Men walk to work with lunch pails in their hands. There are still guns here, still danger, sometimes, but it is not like before. The chaos of the old days is fading. The worst of the killers have been stopped or driven out. The biggest cattle wars are mostly over. For years, Dan has been the sharp edge of the law. Now the edge is duller, or at least harder to see. He watches the town for a long time. He does not smile. He does not frown, but inside he feels something loosening, like a rope that has been pulled tight for too long starting to slacken. Work still comes, but not as often. Sometimes he is asked to serve papers in a simple land dispute. Sometimes he helps calm a family argument before it turns ugly. Sometimes he rides just to show the badge in places where people might be thinking of trouble. You can feel the difference. The wild energy that once filled every day is no longer there. Is not sure whether he misses it or is relieved that it is gone. Maybe both. One evening, he sits alone in a chair outside a boarding house, watching the sky turn orange and then gray. The landlady, a kind woman with tied hands, steps out to sweep the porch. "You're quieter these days, Mr. Tucker," she says gently. "I've always been quiet," he answers. She smiles. "That's true, but this feels different, like your mind's 1,000 miles away." Dan looks out at the street. A group of boys runs past, laughing and pushing each other. One of them has a toy badge pinned to his shirt. He shouts, "I'm the sheriff," hands up. The others pretend to be bandits. They fall down laughing as he points his wooden gun. Don watches them. "That used to be my whole life," he says softly. "Now it's just a game for kids." The landlady leans on her broom. "Maybe that's the point," she says. "Men like you did the hard part, so they only have to play at it." He nods, but he isn't sure if that makes him feel better or more empty. Over time, the offers for hard work come less and less. A new marshal is hired in one town. A young sheriff takes over in another. They wear cleaner clothes, speak fancy words about procedure and proper conduct. They carry guns too, but many of them have never seen what it really means to use them in a life-or-death moment. Some of them respect Dan. They ask him stories. They listen to his advice. Others see him as part of an old world they want to leave behind. Times are changing. One young marshal says to a friend as Dan passes by, "We don't need gunfighters with badges anymore. We need lawmen with rules." Dan hears. He always hears. He keeps walking. There comes a day when no one calls for him. The sheriff does not send a message. No rider comes with urgent news. No one asks him to track a thief or face down a gunman. The day feels strange. He does not know what to do with his hands. With his time for so long, his purpose has been simple: ride where the trouble is, stand in front of it, and try to keep people alive. Now there is only quiet. He walks to the stable and pats his horse's neck. "We might be out of work," he says softly. The horse flicks an ear, then goes back to its hay. Weeks pass, maybe months. Dan stays in one town for a while, then another. Sometimes he helps with small tasks, fixing a fence, checking on livestock, giving calm advice when tempers rise. People know his name, but in a softer way now. "Mr. Tucker," they say. Not Dangerous Dan. The old nickname still exists, but fewer tongues use it. It feels almost like a story someone else lived in the evenings. He sits by windows and watches the light fade from the sky. He thinks of all the men he has faced, some cruel, some foolish, some simply lost. He thinks of the boys by the fire, the drunk in the saloon, the stagecoach robbers, the cattle thieves. He does not count them. He never has, but he feels them. They will always be part of him, woven into his bones like dust into old cloth. There are no big speeches, no final showdown, no dramatic moment where he hangs up his gun in front of a cheering crowd. His work simply slows, then stops, like a wind dying down. Perhaps he keeps the badge in a pocket, or in a small box under a bed. Perhaps he still wears it just in case no one writes it down. No one records the exact day he stops being a lawman and becomes just a man. The records from this time grow thin. Some say he moved to a quieter place. Some say he worked odd jobs on ranches. Others claim he drifted, never fully at rest, always half ready to put the badge back on if someone called for him. But no big story comes. No one can say for sure where he was in his final years or what his last day was like. Did he die in a small room, listening to the wind outside? Did he sit beside a simple fire, looking up at the stars one last time? Did anyone hold his hand? Did anyone thank him for the lives he saved? History is quiet on those answers. What is known is this: the man named Dan Tucker, once called Dangerous Dan, slips out of the written record almost as quietly as he slipped into it. No famous grave, no stone statue, no grand funeral, just a fading trail in the dust of the Old West. Years later, a few old men in rocking chairs might still remember. I rode with Tucker once. One says, he was cold as ice in a fight. Another nods, he wasn't just dangerous. He adds, he was necessary. But those men grow old. They forget details. They pass on. Younger people listen, then move on to their own lives, their own worries. The world changes again, and for a long time, the name Dan Tucker is barely more than a whisper, almost gone, buried under new stories, new heroes, new troubles. Yet the land remembers. The trails he rode, the towns he helped protect, the families who slept easier because he was out there in the dark, they are all pieces of a life that mattered. Even if no one wrote it all down, and though his body is gone and his last days are lost to time, the story of Dangerous Dan Tucker waits quietly in old papers and hidden records, like a faded track in the dust, waiting for someone, someday, to find it again and follow it back to the man behind the legend. For a long time, Dan Tucker is almost gone. His name lies buried under new stories, new wars, new headlines. The Wild West becomes something people watch in movies and read in dime novels, not something they live in. Cowboys turn into characters. Gunfights turn into scenes. The real men behind those old stories start to fade like old ink in the sun. Among those fading names is one that almost disappears completely: Dangerous Dan Tucker. Many years pass. The world changes again and again. Horses give way to cars. Telegrams give way to telephones. Then 2 radios. Then 2 screens that glow in dark rooms. The streets that Dan once rode past on horseback now feel the rumble of engines instead. Most people do not think about cattle rustlers or stagecoach robbers anymore. Their troubles are different now. Bills, work, news, screens, noise. But somewhere, in dusty boxes and old rooms, pieces of the past are still waiting. Old court records, yellowed newspaper pages, letters and reports written in careful handwriting. On some of those pages, a name appears again and again: Dan Tucker. In a quiet library or archive, far from the hot dirt of New Mexico, a researcher opens a file. Maybe he is a historian. Maybe he is a writer with a love for the Old West. He flips through pages. He is looking for stories, the kind that feel real, raw, and human. His eyes land on a line: Deputy Dan Tucker arrested. Dan Tucker shot and killed. Livestock Inspector Dan Tucker. The name repeats, not once, not twice, many times. The researcher sits up straighter. Who was this man? He keeps reading. He finds talk of a lawman who is quiet but deadly. A man who rides into trouble again and again and somehow always comes out alive. Newspaper writers of that old time gave him a name: Dangerous Dan. The researcher is curious now. He looks deeper. He finds reports from sheriffs, lines in ledgers, mentions in letters. They all point to the same picture: a small, steady man who carried a badge, a gun, and a heavy burden. The researcher begins to pull the pieces together, like someone fitting stones back into a broken wall. He traces Dan's early years in New Mexico. He follows his path as a deputy, a town lawman, a livestock inspector. He sees a pattern. Trouble rises and Dan Tucker is sent to face it. Sometimes men surrender. Sometimes they do not. When they don't, the record shows how the fight ends with a shot, a body, and Dan's name on the report. The more the researcher reads, the more he understands something important. Dan Tucker was not just a side note. He was not just a background figure. He was one of the sharp, hard tools the young territory used to cut a path from chaos to order. But somehow, his story never became a famous legend like Wyatt Earp or Wild Bill Hickok. Maybe he was too quiet. Maybe he didn't tell his own tales. Maybe the world simply forgot. The researcher decides that should change, so he writes. He writes about the boy from the north who drifted down into the Wild West. He writes about the deputy who rode alone into camps full of armed men. He writes about the livestock inspector who followed hoofprints across dry riverbeds. He writes about the weight of every bullet, the lonely nights, the thin line between justice and brutality. He does not paint Dan as a perfect hero, nor as a simple villain. He shows him as what he was: a man in a hard place, making hard choices in a hard time. Slowly, the story of Dangerous Dan Tucker comes back into the light. Readers learn that there was once a lawman who was feared by outlaws, watched carefully by neighbors, and almost lost to history. Some people are shocked that they have never heard of him. How can a man with such a record be almost forgotten? They ask. Others are moved by his quietness, by the lack of big speeches or credits at the end. He did the work, they say, and then he just left. In a way, Dan's story becomes a mirror. People who read about him start to think about their own lives, their own choices. No, they are not riding alone into outlaw camps, but they understand what it feels like to carry a heavy responsibility, to be the one others call when something goes wrong, to do what needs to be done, even when others judge you for how you do it. They see the human cost behind the simple word protector. Parents who work long hours, nurses and doctors in quiet hospital halls at night, police officers, firefighters, soldiers, even older siblings stepping in when things get rough. In every life, there is someone who plays the role Dan once played, the one who stands in the way. When danger comes, reading about him makes people ask themselves, what would I do if I had to make a choice that big in a single second? Could I live with the cost of doing what was right when right felt so heavy? For years the story of Dangerous Dan Tucker slept under dust. Now, it wakes up again, not as a shiny legend of a man who never made mistakes, but as the honest tale of a person who walked through a violent world and tried to leave it a little safer than he found it. He is not above blame. He is not beyond question. But he is also not just a name in a file. He is a full life, with doubts, fears, strength, and regret. New readers and viewers see in his story a piece of themselves, the wish to do what's right, the fear of doing it wrong, and the quiet hope that someone, someday, will understand how hard it all truly was. In that understanding, Dan Tucker is no longer just a gun and a badge. He becomes something deeper, a reminder that behind every hard choice is a human heart, beating in the middle of it, trying its best in a world that rarely gives easy answers. So, even though his grave may be unknown, even though his last day is lost, the story of Dangerous Dan Tucker is no longer completely silent. It has been pulled back from the dust, piece by piece, by people who care about the truth behind the legends. And as long as there are listeners, readers, and viewers willing to sit with his story, with all its light and all its shadow, Dan Tucker will never be fully forgotten again. The story of Dangerous Dan Tucker does not end with a roar. It ends the way he lived most of his life, quietly, in the background, doing his work while the world keeps moving forward. By now, the Wild West that shaped him is mostly gone. The rough trails he rode have become roads. The small towns he protected have grown into calmer places with laws that are written, tested, and taught. New lawmen wear cleaner clothes. They follow newer rules. They work in a world where backup can arrive faster, and judges are not weeks away by horse. But none of that changes what came before. And what came before includes Dan Tucker. The man himself leaves no big farewell speech. No one writes down his last words. No one paints his final days. Most likely, he grows old the way many men do. A little slower, a little quieter, a little more alone. Maybe he wakes up with sore bones remembering long rides. Maybe he hears loud noises and, for a quick second, his hand still reaches for a gun that hangs on the wall more than it rides on his hip. People in the town where he spends his later days might know him only as Mr. Tucker, a polite, silent man who tips his hat, pays his bills, and does not talk much about the old times. If someone asks, he might answer with a short story, one small piece of a much bigger life. Then he stops. He does not brag. He does not ask for praise. He just lives and lets the past stay where it is, inside him at some point. Like all men, Dan Tucker's body fails, whether it is in a simple bed, in a small room, with a lamp burning low and a window open to the night air, or out under the sky he knew so well. We do not know. We do not know who was with him. Maybe a doctor, maybe a landlord, maybe no one. His passing is not a headline, but even if no newspaper prints it, even if no bell tolls, the land he walked, the trails he rode, the families he helped protect, they carry his work forward even if they do not speak his name. When a man like Dan dies, his story does not end. It sinks into papers, into old memories, into the quiet corners of history where not many people look for a long time. He stays there, half remembered, half forgotten, like a track fading in the dust. Then, years later, his name is pulled back up again. Writers, historians, people who love real stories more than simple legends. They find him. They gather the pieces, reports, records, stories told long ago. They build his life back step by step, like following hoof marks across dry ground. What they find is not a cartoon hero. They find a man who lived in a time that was harder, rougher, and more dangerous than most of us will ever know. They find a man who carried a badge when a badge did not come with backup, sirens or radios, only with risk. They find a man who was forced to make split-second choices that could not be taken back. Some of those choices saved lives, some of those choices ended lives. All of them stayed with him. The legend says, Dangerous Dan Tucker, the deadliest lawman in New Mexico. The man behind the legend was more than that. He was a boy who left home for a wild land. He was a rider who followed tracks across empty country. He was a deputy who stepped into rooms full of fear and tried to bring order. He was a human being, tired, flawed, strong, worn down, but still standing between danger and the people who could not fight it alone. If someone had asked him near the end, "Are you a hero?" he might have said no. He might have said he was just a man doing a job. But the truth is somewhere in between. He was not perfect. No one who holds power over life and death ever is. Yet without men like him, the West might never have changed from wild land into settled towns. Without men like him, the long road from chaos to law would have been even bloodier. Standing back and looking at his life now, it becomes more than one man's story. It becomes a question for anyone who has ever carried a heavy duty. What does it cost to be the one people call when things go bad? What does it cost to be the shield between danger and home? Dan Tucker's life does not give easy answers, but it shows the weight clearly, honestly. In the end, the best way to see him is not as a spotless hero or as a cold killer. It is to see him as a frontier soul, walking a razor-thin line between right and wrong in a world that did not give him much time to think. A man who tried, day after day, to choose duty over fear. A man who paid for that choice in sleepless nights, lonely days, and memories that never fully went away. Now, as his story is told again in books, in quiet rooms, in voices over screens and speakers, he finally gets something he never asked for but always deserved, to be seen not just as Dangerous Dan, but as Dan Tucker, the full person, standing behind the legend somewhere, in an old file or a forgotten grave. His name may still be written in stone or ink, but more important than any stone or paper is this: every time his story is shared, his life is pulled back from the dust. Every time someone listens and understands the cost of being that kind of lawman, Dan Tucker lives again, not in gunfire, but in memory. And so his story closes, not with a final gunshot, but with a quiet truth. He was there when the West was wild. He stood where it was hardest to stand. He made choices few of us will ever have to make. And though time tried to forget him, it did not win, because now you have heard his name. Dangerous Dan Tucker, the man, the legend, the lawman the outlaws feared, and history almost lost.